Look, this is fossil here. What's left of it. This fossil here, it's fallen apart. It's a tooth of the woolly mammoth. Not in good shape because it's been around a long time. It is all brittle and it completely fallen apart. Now let's take a look at this. Stay right there. Let me show you this. This is the back top side of a turtle shell fossil. One thing I like about fossils, to tell them from rocks, fossils are full of looks like a sponge, millions of little bitty holes and things. That's one way you can tell bone material because of the sponge. Armadillo. This is the lower part of the shell under the tail belly part, and this is the part that was to the ground, and this is the part that was inside the animal. See, I've labeled all of that. Makes it handy that way. Okay. In Florida, anywhere in the United States, you have remains of Indians. Oh, watch it now. There's a federal law. If you find any Indian artifact, it is to be returned to the tribe of Indians in which it came. If you find something that, well, for example, this came from the tribe of Indians known as the Cherokee Indians. For those of you living in the eastern United States, you know the Cherokee. This is flint and this is quartz. These are spearheads. Quite large, see? Spearheads. Do I have to give them back? No, because I bought them off an Indian. You see, Indians are allowed to sell their own artifacts, but if you find anything really awesome, it has to be returned to that tribe. That's a brand new law. In fact, it's going to be quite an interesting development. You see, because if you have to return everything that belonged to the Indians back to them, that means everything we have in the national museums had to be taken out and shipped back to the tribes. So it's still under great discussion of what they want to do. My wife's grandfather found this in his field in Indiana. In other words, he was plowing the field, because he's a farmer up that way, and they came across this. Oh man, that old rock is caught, killing my plants, and look at this. I mean, that would hurt. You see, you take your stick and wrap it around here, your branch, and you tie it with gut string, you know, the guts of an animal's intestines, and you stretch it and dry it, and strip the hide of an animal, and use that for leather straps, and that's how you tie that together. Wouldn't that be handy? Now that's an Indian artifact. Now there's zillions. You like that number? There's zillions of these all over and still in the fields in many parts of the United States. And the Indians are really not interested in bringing them all back. This has nothing fancy on it. There's no designs or patterns, nothing that would really mark it of any value. Look at this one here. This particular, tomahawk, if you'd like, this is a object in which that had a hole in it. How'd they get a hole in there? They don't have electric drills. Do you remember I mentioned just briefly in this series, and if you watch the series on rocks and minerals, rocks of the same family will scratch each other. You get a rock just like this, and very meticulously, week after week, year after year. No, I don't know. You just work on this, and you finally can actually work a hole in there. And that's really spectacular. Many years ago, I got a phone call when I was at the local museum when I was working there. A hurricane had gone through and knocked over some huge trees. Now, I'm taking paper out of here, not because this thing has a cold, but this is to protect it. This happens to be a seashell. So, whoopee-doo, a seashell. But notice this seashell has a very interesting hole in it. Look at that. It's sort of squarish. Square hole. And if I turn this around, look, here's the other half of it right here. Okay? They would put a stick through here. The early tribe of Indians in Florida, known as the Tequesta. If you're Spanish, you spell it with a Q. If you're in English, you spell it with a K. So you may see it both ways. Tequesta Indians lived in Florida. We have never found any complete remains of the Tequesta Indians because as far as we know that when they died, they just died on the ground and the family walked on and left them. And therefore the animals could come up and tear them apart. There's a tribe on the west coast of Florida called the Calusa Indians. Now we know for a fact from people actually caught by the Calusa and kept as prisoners that when they would die, they would put them in a box buried above ground And you say, oh boy, now we can find the bones. Now, because you see, this particular young man who was a prisoner with the Calusa Indians, just to be rude to him, he was posted as a guard, and they always had a guard. He would stay by this smelly box to make sure no animals would tear the body apart. That sounds great. We can find a whole Calusa person from years ago. No, because after the body had decayed, they would open the box, take the bones out, and burn them. Therefore, we have no fossil remains of animals of of people of South Florida. In fact, most of the Indians or natives of South Florida were captured and used as slaves throughout the Caribbean. But this is a Tequesta Indian artifact. I'm sure it's considered priceless. Why do I have it? Well, I was able to get a hold of this and got permission to keep it. But one thing I'm going to show you I did. You know what a TV dinner is? Well, see, I had an artifact. I wanted to make sure that it didn't break apart. This is a piece of Indian pottery, Tequesta Indian pottery. And it's in a TV dinner. See it? I took the TV dinner, had my dinner, I guess, and poured in fiberglass, and I've now entombed this piece of pottery. Let me turn it around. See it? There's your ID numbers. You always have to mark where it's from. It's like a grid, and you mark your sections, and you know exactly what part of the section. You take a picture of it, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, a lot of buildings have been kept from being built until the archaeologists get in there and remove all the artifacts. And when they feel that everything's been taken out, and then they let the construction continue. Usually throughout many parts of the United States, when there are Indian burial mounds, in other words, they took everybody and they buried in huge mounds, and when the mound got high enough, then they would start the next one. So those can be found. Now, a lot of people who are migratory, move from one place to another, where they would spend the night. They would kind of choose the same places, and they would throw all their broken pottery and trash, and that's called a midden, M-I-D-D-E-N. And with a midden, this is where we find a lot of this stuff. Let's go back and look at this piece of pottery one more time, because this is interesting. If you can look very carefully, I'll tilt it. You see that line going across the top? Now, there's actually two lines there. This pottery belonged to a family who lived in an area of about 65th Street on Miami Beach. And you can find other pieces of pottery where they took their thumbnails and they pushed it onto the pottery. Looks like little baby palm trees. Well, those people lived out on a little bit west of the city of Miami. Now, what I'm saying, they found out with the Tequesta Indians, they moved around a lot. They didn't have a village. Moved from one place to the next place to the next place. Each family would mark their pottery, and that would identify their name, like you sign your name. So that's how they signed their family name. And in this particular location, we found pottery from 5 different families. What does that tell you? Well, let's not believe they stole from each other. These were friendly people. That's one reason why they got destroyed, because they were just too friendly, too receptive. But anyway, that's another story. But the point is, they visited each other. They would come and spend the night. They're coming through, and yeah, how you doing? You know, fine, great. And maybe the piece of their pottery would break, and they wouldn't just throw it out in the bushes. These Indians were neat. They didn't recycle, but they did put everything in one pile right outside the campsite. And there's several areas, maybe where you live, that are known as to be Indian mounds. In fact, there's a new housing development that came up, and as they were building the housing development, bingo, there was a mound in the middle of it. They didn't know it until the bulldozer got in there. Boom, guess what? No more bulldozing. They had to stop construction until they got it all out. Now, if you go to visit the site now, it is called Indian Mound Neighborhood Park. They left a lot of it sort of the same way to protect the rest that's there. But the archaeologists did come in and take out everything that was of value, if you'd like. Now, since the Tequesta Indians and a lot of the Indians in other areas around the United States are completely eradicated, they do not exist anymore, then that's one thing the federal government's having some fun with, if you want to call it that. How can we give it back to the Indian tribe when they no longer exist? So, you know how laws are. They become really, fun time. You know, down in South Florida, they have crocodiles. This happens to be a tooth from a crocodile. Not very big, but it's a tooth. This is an alligator tooth. Boy, you can sure tell the difference, can't you? So you've become an expert already. You can tell the alligator tooth from a crocodile tooth. Shape, size, and this cone. That's not a hole in there. That's solid material. See it? It's like a coating, like the white part of your tooth kind of a thing. So, crocodiles. Do you know that in South Florida it's well known that we have the last living group of crocodiles, still doing quite well, even though people like to get them out of here. But yet, remember, Africa was attached to Florida, continental drift broke us apart, and therefore the animals got separated. Moms and dads were separated. No. Animals got separated, and therefore they died, and whatever the reason for dying, and we can find the fossils. So it's fascinating. Why don't you check in your own area? First of all, find out what fossils there are in your own yard. Don't get so highfalutin you have to go look at all these digging up things and fancy stuff. Work to your backyard first. See what you have. Then talk to relatives and friends. Maybe they've got something like Grandpa's Indian artifact sitting on the shelf somewhere. In fact, this was sitting way up back in the corner in the house in our own home here. So anyway, the point is that check around with people. And then go to your local museum and find out if they have any artifacts on display, fossils, Indian artifacts. And then from that, you can learn more and more, and then you can find that maybe a museum or a university will take you on a field trip or a hike in which you can actually do some collecting. So that would be absolutely fascinating. So why don't you start your collection as soon as you can. Start small, little pieces here, little piece there. Go to your local mall, maybe you can even buy a fossil or something. Get your collection started. And remember where you got it, so it's important to tell people for later on, your own next kids as they come along. So okay, that's it. That's Florida geology and fossils. I didn't get everything I wanted to cover, but hey, time permits. So if you are interested, you can always contact me through email or through the website. Florida geology and fossils. That's what this was all about.